Part 17. Man at the Top of the Food Chain. Author, Xionglang Guo. Chapter 161. When Li Anping returned to Daxia Longke's base, the entire base had become deserted. The beauties from all walks of life who kept appearing some time ago have disappeared. Even some of the staff who were not beauties were missing, and the entire base looked much more depressed than before. Just when Li Anping didn't understand what was going on, Li Qian came running over. "Sir, you are back." Li Anping frowned and asked, "What's going on? Where have everyone gone?" "Sir, I received the news yesterday morning that the leader of the Star Alliance, the Queen of Heaven, broke through." Breakthrough. Li Anping was also surprised when he heard the news and said doubtfully, "The leader of the Star Alliance should have been at the 5th level. If she breaks through again." "Yes, she has reached the 6th level," Li Qian said worriedly. "With her current 6th level strength, as well as her group of 5th level ability users, plus the already strong strength of the Star Alliance, she has it's unstoppable. Daxia's top management has given orders for us to make full concessions to the Star Alliance. If they have any demands, we will try our best to satisfy them as long as they are not excessive. The Queen of Heaven, the leader of the Star Alliance, is a mysterious existence that is unknown to all except this title. But even so, being able to lead the entire covenant, he has always been considered one of the most powerful abilities on the entire planet. And now this mysterious, powerful being has finally taken another step forward and become the first person with abilities to reach the 6th level. This news was so shocking that even Li Anping could not imagine it for a while. He took a deep breath and said, "Have Lu Sheng and Lu Feng come to my office to see me, and restrain all other Daxia Longke soldiers to stay in the base. No one is allowed to go out without my order." Next, Li Anping walked to the office, and along the way he began to think about the changes brought about by this news. Suddenly he thought of He. When he first didn't know about ability levels, He had told him that abilities were divided into 10 levels. Later, SpecialAbilities told him that there were only 5 levels in the world. He thought He was wrong. Now that I think about it, it's not that He was wrong, it's just that humans haven't reached the next 5 levels. Even the so-called 5th energy level has only been gradually reached by humans in the past few decades. There are not just 5 levels of ability, and even the 6th level reached by the Queen is not the end. If you think about it this way, He's race is very likely to have people above level 5, level 6, level 7, or even level 8 or 9. If they really come to human society, it's unimaginable. Thinking of this, Li Anping felt even heavier, but there was no time to think about it now. The Queen had reached the 6th level, which was the most important thing at the moment. A few minutes later, Li Anping, Li Qian, Yang Guang, and Lu Sheng all gathered in the office. Among them, Yajiu didn't know about the Queen's breakthrough to the 6th energy level. When he heard the news, he was first shocked and shouted, "How is it possible?" Lu Feng sat aside and smiled bitterly, and said, "This is top secret information. Only I, Momo and Li Qian know about it in the base. So as not to spread it and cause unnecessary panic. Today you know it, no matter what. Don't tell anyone, or it will cause chaos." Li Anping sneered. Although most people in Daxia Longke didn't know the news yet, the top management had already withdrawn so many people. It was obvious that they were no longer optimistic about Daxia Longke, let alone Li Anping. Yajiu frowned and asked, "Have you confirmed the accuracy of this news? Are you sure it is the 6th level? It can't be fake news, right?" "I don't know. Even the Queen of Heaven has always been known to us only by her name. Before, we have never been able to confirm who the leader of the Star Alliance is and what kind of abilities he has," Lu Feng said helplessly, "but this news is from the Star Alliance. I'm afraid what I revealed is unlikely to be false." Yajiu worriedly said, "If it is true, then it depends on how strong the 6th energy level is. But even the difference between the 6th energy level and the 5th energy level is only the difference between the 5th energy level and the 4th energy level. Likewise, the Queen's strength is so strong that no one can restrain her. That's not necessarily true, Li Anping said calmly. No one could cure the first 5th level Donald, and he was besieged to death in the end. The Queen has reached the 6th level, which indeed makes everyone fearful. But it also became a thorn in everyone's side. First of all, the Codex Nation, the Amastrian Federation, and Tyrell in the Western continent may unconsciously unite to fight against the oppression of the Covenant. Their total number of 5th level ability users must be more than 10. Li Anping did not say anything about his increased strength, although he now feels that his strength has surpassed the ordinary 5th level. But he didn't know whether he could compete with the Queen's 6th level. Moreover, energy level is not everything. Whether the ability itself is superior is sometimes more critical. For example, Jingguang's transformation ability and Yanbei's collapse ability can be challenged by leapfrogging levels. Coupled with the mutual restraint and suppression of abilities, the relationship inside is even more complicated. What about the Flame Dragon Pioneers? Li Qian asked another question. Do you think they will join forces with us? After all, they were also oppressed by the Star Alliance this time, right? Otherwise, they would have taken the opportunity to fight over. The possibility is very small, Lu Feng said decisively. The East Continent is different from the West Continent. Daxia and Ice Castle are sworn enemies. If it weren't for the relationship with the Star Alliance 20 years ago, we would have completely occupied them. The countless blood feuds accumulated in it cannot be wiped out with just a few words. Yajiao nodded with feeling. I'm afraid that the fact that the Queen of Heaven has been promoted to the 6th energy level will only force them to the side of the Star Alliance. Several people discussed it, but facing the completely unknown 6th energy level, they couldn't think of any feasible solutions. They could only disperse helplessly. Only Li Anping's eyes flashed a cold light. With his current strength, the abilities of Zhurong and Blood Demon in the Flame Dragon Vanguard are not a concern. But the White Dwarf is very troublesome. Once he hides in the earth, even Li Anping can't do anything to him for a while. There is also the mysterious Pluto. A level 5 ability user with unknown abilities, but since he can lead the Flame Dragon Vanguard alone, his strength is obviously not to be underestimated. Li Anping began to browse the recent intelligence about the Ice Castle. With his current strength, it was time to find an opportunity to attack the Flame Dragon Vanguard. In addition to Pluto and White Dwarf, he was confident that he could kill Zhurong or Blood Demon. If he could seize the time to absorb Blood Demon and Zhurong, perhaps his actual combat power could be comparable to that of a level 6 ability user. In the next few days, Li Anping disappeared from everyone's sight again. Only Tang Vihan was a substitute every day, and he rarely appeared. But whether it was Wang Chang's summons or the meeting of the Daxia high-level officials, Tang Vihan did not participate. In the eyes of others, this has become an obvious sign of weakness and escape. Li Wei laughed wildly at home. Li Anping, this bastard, knows how powerful he is this time. When the Star Alliance comes, I'll see how you end it. On the other side, the Song family, the head of the family, Song Qiuzhong, even held a dinner at home, waiting for the power of the Star Alliance to come to Daxia to avenge Song Bang. They believe that with the relationship between the Song family and the Star Alliance, their status will definitely rise by then. Some people are glad that they joined the Star Alliance in advance, and naturally some people are worried about their future. Wang Chang, Xiao Anran, and Gao Tianwen have been frowning every day during this period. Originally, they hoped to rely on Li Anping to fight against the Star Alliance, but now the news that the Queen has reached the 6th energy level is like a club, which directly knocked them down. During this period, they, including the other 9 royal families, have withdrawn all their confidants from Daxia Lonke. Even Wang Chang and others began to contact Bruman, the Star Alliance envoy. But after a few days, Bruman never replied to Wang Chang, which made him feel colder and colder. Not only that, although many ordinary people don't know what happened, under the order of the highest level, the forces of the 9 royal families are gradually withdrawing from Tianjin City. Because all the heads of the families are worried that the Star Alliance and Li Anping will fight in Tianjin City. However, compared with others, Zhang Yanhan, the head of the Zhang family, is obviously the most tormented at this time. As a family that has invested all its capital in Li Anping, their fate can be imagined if Li Anping collapses, especially since they have just invested a large amount of money in Li Anping some time ago, and their strength has been greatly reduced. During this period of time, the sniping of the Zhang family's assets by various families has made Zhang Yanhan overwhelmed. What made him feel even more depressed was that he had been contacting Li Anping to meet him, but the other party refused to meet him several times. If Li Anping had not been seen every day, I am afraid that other family heads, including Zhang Yanhan, would suspect that Li Anping had escaped. Man at the top of the food chain. Author, Xianglang Guo. Chapter 162. 3 days later, in the Western continent. In a small border town where the Codex Kingdom and the Amsite Federation intersect. Thick smoke covered the entire town, and blood and fire became the most common background. In this town that looked like the end of the world, a blonde woman stood on a street as if nothing had happened. Around her, there were corpses lying on the ground, exploded cars and dilapidated buildings everywhere, which formed a sharp contrast with the woman's indifferent look. Next to the woman, there was a black-haired young man sitting cross-legged. The young man had a handsome face and looked extremely handsome, giving people a feeling of walking out of a painting. However, the young man frowned at this time, and a trace of pain appeared on his face from time to time. I don't know what he was doing. At this time, a group of weirdos appeared in the distance. They were expressionless, powerful, and ran like wild horses. When they saw the standing blonde woman and the black-haired young man sitting cross-legged, their eyes revealed a bloodthirsty light, and they roared and rushed over. Hearing this voice, the young man still sat cross-legged, not caring at all. The blonde woman only glanced at the monsters rushing over, and then she stretched out a finger. With one finger pointed, the tyrannical spirit rushed towards the attacking monsters with the force of turning the river and the sea. Those monsters were all strong and powerful. 4 or 5 of them could even knock over a car with a frontal attack. He had never encountered an opponent in the town while crashing and killing, but this time he was torn to pieces by the woman's spirit like a toy. In one finger, dozens of monsters were killed. The blonde woman raised her hand again, and a bunch of spiritual fire that was invisible to the naked eye floated out of each monster's head. The woman said to the black-haired young man who was sitting cross-legged, "Zhenhai, can you still accept it?" Shang Zhenhai shook his head, "No, leader, I have reached the limit. If I absorb more, I will probably go insane and die." The woman, who was called leader by Shang Zhenhai, nodded, and then sucked all the spiritual fire into her mouth, just like a whale sucking water. In just a few seconds, the dozens of spiritual fires were all sucked up by the woman. The young man on the side was envious, but he knew that this kind of spiritual fire not only contained the soul power of the dead, but also had countless memories and consciousness. Once the absorber's will was not firm enough, the power was not strong enough, and the absorbed spiritual fire was too much, it was not enough to suppress the complicated consciousness, and the absorber himself would be mentally disordered. After absorbing more than a dozen spiritual fires, the woman known as the leader, that is, the leader of the Star Alliance, the Queen, asked again, "Zhenhai, how long will it take you to digest it?" "Leader, it will take about 4 or 5 hours," Shang Zhenhai estimated. "After this absorption, I should be able to reach the 4th energy level. The upgrade speed is too fast. It takes too long, it's too late." The blonde woman frowned and shook her head and said, "The source of infection has escaped into the territory of the code 2 hours ago. We can't be too far away from him, otherwise once he recovers, it will be very troublesome for me to deal with him. Shang Zhenhai nodded solemnly. The so-called source of infection is the culprit who caused cannibalism in the Amist Federation. According to the investigation, it is suspected that it is an Amist Federation person who suddenly awakened his ability on the West Coast. His ability is very special. He can emit and spread a virus from his body. This virus can only infect ordinary people. After being infected, ordinary people will lose their minds. At the same time, they are extremely powerful, as fast as a galloping horse, and fearless of death. Because ordinary people infected will have a strong desire to eat humans, the virtual number agency calls this infectious disease cannibalism. And the infected people are called human monsters. The most terrifying thing about cannibalism is that ordinary people bitten by human monsters will also be infected with the virus and become the next human monster. Originally, after discovering this virus, the virtual number agency directly cooperated with the army to wipe out all the human monsters at once. In fact, they did it very smoothly at first. After all, although human monsters are highly contagious, their combat effectiveness is not high. With the powerful ability of the virtual number agency and the advanced weapons of the army, it is very easy to wipe them out. But the whole thing took a sharp turn after a discovery. An ability user of the virtual number agency accidentally discovered the ability user who spread the virus. Before discovering that ability user, everyone thought it was just a sudden outbreak of the virus, and no one thought it was caused by the ability. When the ability user who spread the virus was discovered, the other party was creating new human monsters. What followed was a series of pursuits and searches. But the more they came into contact with this ability user, the more surprised the people of the virtual number agency were. They named the target ability user X. They found that the biggest purpose of X's ability was not to cause destruction. His real purpose of spreading the virus was to hunt. X first spread the virus. After humans were infected with the virus and turned into human monsters, they would hunt humans crazily. By hunting humans, human monsters would become stronger and stronger. When human monsters become strong to a certain extent, they would return to find X, and X would directly eat human monsters. After eating human monsters, he would absorb the power of human monsters. This is an unprecedented brutal ability. In order to prevent X from growing to a point where it is difficult to control, the virtual number agency directly dispatched two level 5 ability users, Silver Moon Giant God and Fierce Fang Giant God, to hunt down X. But when they arrived, X had grown from the initial 3rd energy level to the 5th energy level. What's worse, their actions were stopped by the Star Alliance. At that time, the Silver Moon Giant God directly fought with the Titan, the highest cadre of the Star Alliance who came. But until now, the imaginary number agency has not been able to figure out why the Star Alliance wanted to stop them. What they don't know is that the Queen of Heaven, for some unknown reason, personally studied the incident between X and the human monster and made a major discovery. The human monster hunts humans and then offers himself to X. This seems to be a method with great energy loss. But after the Queen of Heaven's research, it was found that the facts are far from this. Through the Queen of Heaven's 5th energy level mental force field, she found that the soul of the infected human monster would turn into a little soul fire. Every time a person is killed, half of the human soul will be absorbed, and the remaining half will become the soul fire of the new human monster. So the more people the human monster kills, the stronger its power will be, and the stronger its soul fire will be. When they become strong to a certain limit, they will return to X and contribute their own soul fire. The power that X used to absorb and grow stronger was the soul fire. X's virus, through the transformation of the body, affects the operation of the soul. This ability is simply incredible. The Queen immediately thought of whether ordinary people with special abilities can absorb the soul fire. She found that with the help of mental abilities, any person with special abilities can absorb these soul fires. Although the efficiency is only about 10% of X, it is also very scary. This means that they can make themselves stronger by harvesting the human monsters created by X. The Queen's ability to break through to the 6th energy level is obviously closely related to the appearance of human monsters. This is also the real reason why they prevented the virtual number agency from destroying X. But it is obviously very unsafe to let X stay in the Amist Federation. The actions of the Star Alliance will be suspected by the virtual number agency. So the Star Alliance and the virtual number agency split into two groups. On the surface, they chased X, but in fact, they absorbed the spiritual fire of the human monster along the way. However, in order to prevent X from becoming more and more powerful and difficult to control, the Queen of Heaven personally led the team and kept the rhythm well controlled. Every time, X was allowed to spread the virus, but before he absorbed the human monster, he was directly injured and driven away, and the Queen of Heaven came to absorb the spiritual fire. As for the more than 300,000 civilians who died along the way, it was not the concern of the Star Alliance. They even consciously drove X to the Code Country, and the Code Country was the weakest among the three major powers in the Western continent. When Shang Jinhai thought of this, he thought, maybe the entire Code Country will be sacrificed and become a land of death, and X will be captured after being used, either for research or imprisonment. At this moment, the Queen of Heaven on the side suddenly said, "Jinhai, your ability is very promising. Although it has not been announced and listed in the ability sequence, I estimate that with the superiority of your ability, it is enough to rank in the top 5 in the ability sequence of the field system. That's why I brought you here to quickly improve your ability. I am very grateful for the kindness of the leader." Shang Jinhai knelt down. "Okay, there is no time. Since you can't absorb it yet, I will absorb it first. Then go after X." The Queen of Heaven stretched out her hand and the whole town was shrouded in an invisible spiritual force field. Tens of thousands of monsters were hit hard and were flattened by the invisible force at the same time. Then, tens of thousands of spiritual fires were pulled out directly under the effect of the spiritual force field, and gathered towards the Queen of Heaven like a river in the sky. In just half a minute, tens of thousands of monsters were wiped out by the Queen of Heaven. After absorbing all the spiritual fire, the Queen said calmly, "Jinhai, get ready to go. Next, we have to approach X once, but this body is too fragile and can only exert 30% of my strength. You have to be careful next time. But this is also an opportunity to hone you. Energy level is not everything, actual combat is the best alchemy stone." At this moment, the Queen's communicator sounded. After the Queen clicked it, a voice came from it, "Congratulations to the leader for being promoted to the 6th energy level. From now on, you will be invincible in the world." "Okay, Blumen, stop talking nonsense, what do you want?" the Queen said coldly. Blumen flattered, "Alliance leader, you were busy with the affairs of the Amist Federation some time ago, so my instructions on Daxia have not been approved. I heard that the Alliance leader has finally been promoted to the 6th energy level, so is it?" Li Enping from Daxia, the Queen's mind flashed with the evaluation report on Li Enping. Although his potential is good, he is indeed a bit of an eyesore. "I will send Yulia and Mammon to help you. After Li Enping disappears, you can disband the Dragon Bird of Daxia and recruit all the ability users above the 3rd energy level. For other matters, please follow Yulia's opinion." Hearing that his right to dispose of Daxia changed hands in an instant, Blumen hesitated and said, "Yes, sir." But Shang Jinhai on the side suddenly interrupted, "Alliance leader, I wonder if you can spare Li Enping's life." "Oh," the Queen seemed to suddenly remember something, "yes, it seems that your father and brother died at the hands of Li Enping. Do you want to take revenge yourself?" "Yes," Shang Jinhai asked, "I wonder if the Alliance leader can give me this opportunity." "Okay, wait till you reach the 4th energy level and rush over," the Queen agreed. She still admired Shang Jinhai very much. "With your ability, the 4th energy level is enough to deal with him. But at that time, you must also follow the arrangements of Yulia and Mammon, and can't do anything on your own. Thank you, Leader Shang Jinhai said happily. The corners of his mouth couldn't help but curl up. At the same time, on the snowy land in the north of the East continent, Li Anping was heading towards the ice castle. He didn't know that in the distant West continent, some things closely related to him were gradually developing. A creature with similar but absolutely different abilities as him was about to or was turning the West continent upside down, until it caused a shocking storm that swept the world. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Man at the Top of the Food Chain. Author, Xiong Lango. Chapter 163. On the snowy plain, Li Anping's feet were deeply mired in the snow. The sudden snowstorm blurred everything in his vision. He pressed the headset and said, "Hello. I'm almost there. In order to prevent the communication from being discovered, I will not contact you for the time being. How is the situation in Tianjing?" "Everything is normal. There is no new move from the Star Alliance, and the 9 royal families are all watching coldly." Momo's voice came from the other end of the headset. "That's good. If something bad happens, Lu Sheng and the others will take you away. Remember, don't be impulsive. Hide and wait for me to come back." Suddenly, Li Qian's voice came over, "My lord." She was silent for a long time, and finally all her words turned into one sentence, "You must come back alive." Li Anping was silent for a while, and said seriously, "Just wait for me, I will definitely come back." After speaking, Li Anping pulled out the earplugs, and with a strong squeeze of his right hand, he had crushed the communicator to pieces. The next moment, he had already soared into the sky. With the passing of waves, Li Anping broke through the blockade of the blizzard, and then in the blink of an eye, he had broken through the troposphere and arrived at the stratosphere. The clouds kept changing under his feet, and the visibility here was much better than on the ground. Li Anping took out the GPS, identified the direction, and flew north. This time his target was the capital of the ice castle, Morocco. According to the latest intelligence, the blood banks of major hospitals in Morocco have recently experienced a serious shortage of blood. The municipal government has come forward to encourage citizens to donate blood to the hospital and provided a series of benefits for blood donors. Recalling the current 4 level 5 abilities of the Flame Dragon Pioneer, the Blood Demon's ability of blood-sucking disease can rely on absorbing blood to recover from injuries. So Li Anping and others suspected that the Blood Demon was injured when participating in the encirclement and suppression of the Flying General, and is now hiding somewhere in Morocco to heal his injuries by sucking blood. More than an hour later, Li Anping landed from the sky and came to a gas station, changed his clothes, and took a bus to Morocco. After all, it was not easy for him to fly directly into Morocco, as it would be too easy to be discovered. After sitting down at the last seat, Li Anping listened to the Ice Castle language coming from his ears and took out an Ice Castle dictionary from his arms. He flipped through it quickly. He had read about 2/3 of this dictionary when he was in Daxia, and before that he had read the basic grammar and sentence deconstruction. With Li Anping's current brain memory and processing speed, it was enough for him to complete the study of this language before arriving in Morocco. Half an hour later, Li Anping had completely learned the Ice Castle language, and the only thing left was the proficiency of speaking. He looked out the window. There were very few cars on the road, the style of the cars was very backward, and the few houses that were rarely seen looked very dilapidated. Even the passengers on the bus looked very plainly dressed. The entire ice castle gave Li Anping the same feeling as Daxia 20 years ago. This is the price of war. 10 years ago, Daxia broke through the border of the ice castle, and then had to give up the results that were about to be achieved under the pressure of the Star Alliance. Although Daxia unilaterally stopped the invasion, war is never something you can stop just because you say so. In the next 10 years, the entire ice castle was under the pressure of Daxia and was fully prepared for war. There were constant frictions on the border, the military budget was getting higher year by year, there were many internal conflicts in the country, and the gap between the rich and the poor was getting bigger and bigger. Everyone was looking forward to a war to release the pressure of the entire country. Whether it was victory or failure. At this moment, Li Anping suddenly turned his head and found that a little boy about 10 years old was staring at him closely. There was a look of desire in his eyes. Li Anping raised his hand, pointed to the dictionary, and asked in a somewhat unfamiliar ice castle language, "Do you want this?" Yeah, the boy nodded shyly. The mother sitting next to her grabbed him and said embarrassedly, "This, sir, little Victor has no chance to go to school. I wonder if you can lend him your book to read." Li Anping nodded and handed the dictionary over. The boy named Little Victor couldn't wait to take the dictionary and began to look through it. Her mother smiled gratefully, "Thank you, sir." Then Li Anping took this opportunity to start chatting with the woman in iceberg language to practice his spoken English. In just over 10 minutes, Li Anping's spoken English was already fluent. "Sir, are you really not from Morocco? Your Morocco accent is even more authentic than my husband's, who has lived in Morocco since he was a child. The people of Daxia all have black hair and black eyes, while Iceberg is a multi-ethnic country with blonde, black, and red hair." So the woman couldn't tell whether Li Anping was from Iceberg. Li Anping smiled and told the woman that he had lived in Morocco since he was a child, but he went to the south to do business in the past few years. So then he asked about the recent situation in Morocco. 20 minutes later, the bus suddenly stopped when it was 5 kilometers away from Morocco, and then several big men rushed up with daggers in their hands. They shouted, "Robbery! Hand over all your valuables!" Just as people were panicking, Li Anping frowned and blew gently. A few white lights flashed in the air, and the big men were all knocked unconscious and fell to the ground. Everyone screamed. While the woman screamed, she turned her head to look at Li Anping, but she felt the bus shake violently, and then a strong wind blew by. There was no trace of Li Anping anywhere, only the dictionary was still lying there. In the boy's hand, it was announced that a strange man had existed. Li Anping got out of the car and reached the highway checkpoint with several leaps. Ice Castle has to go through checkpoints every time they go from one city to another, and the whole country is always on high alert. Everyone is completely subject to state surveillance. An ordinary person may not have traveled more than 100 kilometers from his hometown for more than 10 years. But of course this was not a problem for Li Anping. With a slight exertion, he had jumped over the checkpoint at a speed that was difficult to discern with the naked eye, and then headed towards the urban area of Morocco. The entire Morocco is about 5,000 square kilometers, less than half of Tianjin. Everywhere he went, Li Anping felt nothing but depression. The long-term militarized management and the tilt of military resources have placed a huge burden on the entire country. The streets are full of homeless people, children begging, and students marching. You can also see armored vehicles patrolling the road constantly. This country needs change, Li Anping murmured. Then he walked towards the largest public hospital in Morocco. The blood bank there was Li Anping's target. With his proficiency in Ice Castle, Li Anping quickly became familiar with the area around the hospital and found out the location of the blood bank. He climbed to the top of the building, squatted on the eaves, and stared at the location of the blood bank. At the same time, his ears listened to sounds from a kilometer around him, including people's conversations, patients' cries of pain, and women's curses. All kinds of sounds entered his brain from Li Anping's ears, and were quickly analyzed by the brain. Come out and get results. As long as someone comes to transport blood, Li Anping is confident that he will find it as soon as possible. A few hours passed quickly, and Li Anping saw several blood donation vehicles driving to the hospital, delivering the newly obtained blood to the blood bank. However, there is still no one to transport the blood from the blood bank. While waiting, Li Anping also killed a robber, 2 rapists, and a doctor who was deceiving a patient. The environment here is really much worse than Tianjin. 6 hours later, Li Anping had killed 12 criminals who had nothing to do with the target, but still had not found the target he wanted. Just when Li Anping was about to give up and change the direction of his investigation, a container truck drove into the hospital. Several soldiers got off the truck, roughly pushed aside the blood bank staff, and carried the bags of blood directly onto the truck. Li Anping heard the staff inside shouting, "You can't do this. It's been a month. Do you know how many people have died in this hospital bed due to insufficient blood supply? Put the blood down, we won't let you take it." Then there was a sound of punches and kicks, and a cold voice replied, "Gentlemen and ladies, you are against this country, against the people who defend the people and defend you. Let me find out who is hiding it next time blood bag, or prevent us from working. I guarantee he won't see the sun the next day." Then there was the sound of a door closing and a car starting. A cold light flashed in Li Anping's eyes, and he quietly followed the container truck. Man at the top of the food chain. Author, Xiang Go. Chapter 164. Li Anping used his extremely fast speed to sprint under the truck, then he grabbed the truck's chassis with both hands and drove away with the truck. Along the way, the truck went to several other hospitals in the center of Morocco, forcibly transported all the blood in the blood bank, and then began to drive towards the suburbs outside the city. Along the way, Li Anping used his hearing to listen to the conversations of the staff on the container truck. With his extraordinary hearing and his familiarity with the Ice Castle language, he could hear the conversations on the truck clearly. However, the people on the 2 container trucks did not seem to know about the ability users or even the blood demons. They only knew that the trucks would go to the fiefdom of an Ice Castle noble. As for why blood was transported and who the noble was, they knew nothing. Li Anping had no choice but to hide under the car and follow the container truck all the way. After a bumpy ride, the container truck drove into a manor, and then soldiers began to check the truck. One of the soldiers took a flashlight and shone it at the bottom of the truck. A beam of white light swept all the way to the bottom of the car, and there was nothing in sight. Li Anping had already gotten out from under the car at superhuman speed, and the soldiers who were checking could only feel a gust of wind sweeping by, and could not see anything. And the gust of wind was too normal for the people of Ice Castle in the snowy weather. When Li Anping went out, he glanced around and found that the truck was currently parked in a square. There were patrolling soldiers everywhere around the square. In addition, there were several similar trucks parked next to the truck. Just as Li Anping was observing, another truck drove in from outside the square. Obviously, there was more than one truck transporting blood. Seeing this, Li Anping was more certain that this batch of blood was used to heal the blood demon. Thinking of this, he became more cautious and hid in a shadow outside the square, trying his best to restrain his mind. According to previous intelligence, when the blood demon last appeared, White Dwarf and Zhurong were by his side. Now if the blood demon is healing, it is very likely that White Dwarf and Zhurong are also here. Although he may not be able to defeat the 3 of them together, it is better not to be besieged. It is better for Li Anping to secretly absorb the seriously injured blood demon and then go to find the White Dwarf and Zhurong. Li Anping moved cautiously in the shadows. With his speed, it was unlikely that others would notice him even if he kept running around, but that would continue to cause strong winds, which was a big flaw. So Li Anping would rather slow down in exchange for the chance of being discovered. After all, he may have to face 3 level 5 ability users now, so it is not too careful. Maybe the victory or defeat is accumulated in such small details. However, the Ice Castle is much behind Daxia in technology. Although the manor where he is now has been armed into a military camp, the means of defense are still very backward. They all rely on manpower, probes, and military dogs. If there are various infrared, weight detection, thermal vision, electromagnetic detection, and other means in an underground base like Daxia, it will be much more troublesome for Li Enping to sneak in quietly. Now, even if Li Enping does not rely on speed, he still moves very fast in the shadows with his agility. Then he directly found a house in a corner. Then he hid in the ventilation duct. He planned to wait until night to start searching the entire manor. At the same time, he could also collect information with superhuman hearing during this time. A few hours later, it was already midnight. Today, the moon in the sky was also covered by layers of dark clouds. Even if many spotlights were turned on in the entire manor, there were still large areas covered by shadows, which also provided great convenience for Li Enping's infiltration work. It only took 15 minutes, combined with the news he heard during the break before, he had already familiarized himself with the general structure of the manor. There was no news about the White Dwarf, the Blood Demon and Zurong. However, the main building in the center of the manor was very suspicious. Every batch of blood scent would eventually be sent there. Li Enping stood on a wall, carefully looking at the main building, looking for suspicious intrusions. At the same time, in the underground space of the main building of the manor, a feast of blood was going on. The underground space is about 1,000 square meters, with huge stone pillars everywhere, looking like a huge palace. In the center of the palace is a steaming pool. It is called a pool, but it is not water, but blood. I saw blood churning in the pool, as if something terrible was hiding under the blood pool and watching the world. This huge pool of churning blood is like a passage to the underworld, giving people all kinds of uneasy feelings. And just above the blood pool, on the roof of the palace, is a circular passage. Every once in a while, a large amount of blood will be poured down from the passage and merged into the blood pool. It is unknown how deep the entire blood pool is, and no matter how much blood is added, it has never overflowed. With so much blood in the blood pool, the unique smell of blood should have filled this underground palace. But the entire underground palace not only does not smell a trace of blood, but is filled with a special sweet fragrance, which makes people feel fascinated. Beside the blood pool, there was a huge bed, with all the bedding and decorations in blood red. A perfect white body was lying on the bed. It was a beautiful young woman. At this moment, her eyes were dull and she had a strange smile on her face, as if she was in a strange dream. A slender blond man sat on her body and kept rising and falling. Then, with a low roar, he trembled for a few seconds, then he lay on the woman and bit her neck. Under the effect of the sweet fragrance, the woman whose neck was bitten not only did not resist at all, but hugged the man with both hands and feet, with an expression of great satisfaction and happiness on her face. A few minutes later, the woman's face was already pale, but the blond man was still sucking until he could no longer suck a drop of donated blood, and then he stood up with a satisfied look on his face. Looking at the mummy on the bed, the man showed a trace of disgust, raised his leg directly, and kicked the woman into the blood pool. The woman's body drew an arc in the air and fell into the blood pool. A few seconds later, the blood pool boiled and decomposed the whole body at a speed visible to the naked eye. Finally, the woman turned into nutrients in the blood pool and disappeared without a trace. The blond man walked lazily towards the blood pool and jumped into it. The blood pool was enough to dissolve the body, but it did not threaten him at all. The man sank into the blood pool for a few seconds and then floated up, then leisurely leaned on the edge of the blood pool, enjoying the power of the blood pool repairing and strengthening his body bit by bit. Just as the man showed an expression of enjoyment on his face and groaned, a deep voice sounded in the empty hall. "Blood Demon, my lord asked me to ask you, how is your injury?" Blood Demon, the blond man lying in the pool of blood, lazily replied, "White Dwarf, do you know how much of a spoilsport you are?" As Blood Demon answered, a huge face made entirely of mud and stone rose from the floor of the palace. He looked at Blood Demon and said again in a unique deep voice, You have used more than the prescribed amount of in the past month. My lord requires you to stop this behavior immediately until next month. Blood Demon sneered, don't use Pluto to pressure me, isn't it just a few dozen women who died? Hundreds of years ago, we Lazambo ruled this land, not to mention dozens of women, even thousands or tens of thousands of women, it's just a matter of a word. I've had enough of the time I spent with you. Now I'm enjoying myself, and you all want to interfere? Stoneface replied calmly, I have brought the order. If you don't obey, you will be angry with the adults. Also, be careful. Although Daxia is no longer a threat, the Queen has reached the 6th energy level. I'm afraid that the plan to jointly oppress Daxia with the Star Alliance will also be revised. The adults asked you to go to the base as soon as possible after your injuries are healed and meet us. Then Stoneface quickly retracted to the ground and disappeared. The blood demon in the blood pool snorted coldly, wanting to express dissatisfaction, but thinking of the horror of Hades, he decided to temporarily stop using this month. When he sank his body into the blood pool again and enjoyed the warmth brought by the blood pool, he didn't notice that a terrible monster had broken into the main building and attacked the underground palace. Man at the top of the food chain. Author, Xianglango. Chapter 165. In a vent in the main building of the manor, Li Anping was quietly looking at the corridor under his feet. Teams of soldiers passed by the corridor, but Li Anping did not move, still listening and waiting patiently. 10 minutes later, a soldier passed under the vent, holding his stomach. Just as he passed by the vent, a shadow flashed by, and the soldier was dragged into the vent by Li Anping before he could say a word. From knocking open the panel of the vent, to grabbing the soldier and dragging him in, and finally hitting the panel, there was not even a half second before and after. A minute later, Li Anping, who appeared in the main building again, had changed into an ice castle uniform, lowered his hat and walked towards a corner of the house. Although he could sneak in the house with the help of Superman before, there were several places without blind spots, and even Li Anping could hardly enter without being discovered by anyone, so he chose to use disguise to detect those places he could not go before. Li Anping walked to a dead corner of the corridor, tapped the opposite wall with his fingers, and put his ear against it to listen carefully. He frowned and thought, I can't hear any sound. Is there a soundproofing method like vacuum glass? Through the previous observation after stealth and disguise, Li Anping observed the thickness of the wall and the size of the room with his strong observation and calculation ability. He noticed that there was a columnar space that could be penetrated from the first floor to the third floor in the center of the house. This space is behind the wall in front of Li Anping. Just when Li Anping was thinking about whether to punch a hole out, he suddenly turned his head and frowned. Just now, he heard a woman scream in a room on the third floor. At this time, in a bedroom on the third floor, a red-haired girl was pressed on the bed by a soldier. The soldier wanted to take off her clothes, but the girl refused to obey and was struggling constantly. In the corner of the room, several girls were trembling and looking at the soldier in fear. Suddenly, the door of the room was knocked open, and another soldier rushed in and grabbed the soldier on the bed. Are you looking for death? These are all needed by the higher UPS. Anyway, it's enough for this month. What if I use one? I can just find another one next month. Damn it, I've been guarding here all day, and I'm almost suffocating to death. At that moment, the two people were seen wrestling, and the woman on the bed also screamed and ran to the corner, hiding with a group of women, watching the two soldiers fighting each other stupidly. As a result, the soldier who entered the room later was punched in the back of the head by another soldier, and he fainted on the ground with a black vision. The remaining soldier sneered, then looked at the women in the corner and showed a lewd smile. Damn it, I've been guarding here for more than 2 years, and I'm almost sick. The bastards above only know how to oppress us soldiers. Today I'm going to have a good time. As he spoke, he slowly walked towards the women, but just after a few steps, he heard the sound of the door opening and closing behind him. Who? He turned around with a vigilant look, but could only see a black shadow flashing by, and the whole person had lost consciousness and fell to the ground. Li Anping glanced at the women, walked over and knocked them all down one by one. Then he lifted the soldier who wanted to abuse him onto the bed. He began a cruel interrogation. Li Anping wiped his hands and murmured, "It's been a long time since I tortured him in person." Next, he first tore a piece of cloth and put it into the soldier's mouth, then slapped the soldier to wake him up, and then all kinds of inhumane torture followed. From mental and verbal oppression to physical harm, Li Anping also obtained various important information from the soldier. According to what he said, this manor belongs to an unknown nobleman. The garrison here does not know who this nobleman is, and has never even met him. These soldiers were sent here to garrison 2 years ago. What they have to do is to defend this place, otherwise ordinary people will come to harass them. At the same time, trucks will deliver and blood every month, and they need to transport them underground through the secret pipeline in the center of the main building. As for what the underground where the pipeline leads to looks like and what is inside, no one knows. However, for some reason, the amount of blood and delivered in recent times is much more than usual. When Li Anping heard this, he was 90% sure that the blood demon must be hiding in the underground of the main building to heal his wounds. However, Li Anping was not sure whether Zhu Rong and others would help him. But no matter whether he was sure or not, he had to go down. Otherwise, the longer the time dragged, the more disadvantageous it would be for Li Anping. So Li Anping came to the wall of the dead corner again. This time he did not hesitate, and directly pulled out a high-frequency dagger, and dug a small hole in the wall with a few strokes. This high-frequency dagger is much less powerful than a high-frequency knife, but because of its small size, it is easy to carry and not easy to be discovered, so Li Anping brought it to the ice castle this time. Cutting the wall like this would not make any sound, but the underground palace where the blood demon was empty, and there was no other sound except the sound of the blood pool churning. Although the sound of Li Anping cutting the wall was extremely subtle, the blood demon could hear it clearly. The blood demon, who was soaking in the blood pool, opened his eyes lazily and looked up in surprise. "What's going on? Didn't I tell you not to arrange any more today?" "Huh? There are experts." The next moment, the blood demon's expression changed drastically, and he turned into a blood shadow and flew out. I saw that the entire blood pool had been enveloped by a white shockwave, and large areas of blood were sputtered out, covering the ground. The blood in these blood pools is different from ordinary blood, and it is unknown what its nature is. After falling on the ground, it evaporates directly into the air within a few seconds. Seeing the blood he had worked so hard to raise being wasted like this, the blood demon felt like his heart was bleeding. He screamed and pointed out, only to see a flash of blood and hundreds of firefly-sized blood flames shooting into the air. He rushed towards the falling shadow. Li Anping, who fell from the pipe, snorted coldly, exerted force on his feet, and a wave of air swept over him and rushed towards the blood demon in the distance. Beyond the speed of sound, the whole world slowed down again. Li Anping rushed towards the blood demon step by step. He still had time to turn his head and glance at the destroyed blood pool. When he saw this blood pool, a hint of haze appeared in his eyes, and his speed increased again. In Li Anping's eyes, the whole world seemed to become slower. He could clearly see the blood flames moving towards his position inch by inch. He could see the blood demon's ferocious expression, and he could see the uncertain colors on his body. Red light. In less than 0.1 seconds, Li Anping had already arrived in front of the blood demon, and then punched the blood demon directly in the head. Li Anping struck at full speed. His power was so fierce that he could blow away a mountain. What's more, in order to kill the 5th level ability user blood demon immediately, he didn't hold back at all. If this punch hit the ground, I'm afraid it would directly cause a small earthquake. With a bang, Facing the supersonic Li Anping, the blood demon had no time to react at all. His head was blown off by the punch. The whole head was shattered like a watermelon and turned into countless fragments, shooting around. At this time, there were violent explosions in the air, like a missile exploding in the underground palace. The air was directly pushed away by Li Anping's huge force, turning into countless hurricanes blowing in all directions, and then it made a crackling sound when it hit the wall. The headless body of the blood demon was blown out by the hurricane, and then fell to the ground motionless. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Man at the top of the food chain. Author, Xianglang. Chapter 166. Li Anping saw that the blood demon's body was motionless, but he did not relax at all. Because he did not feel that he absorbed any soul, this was the best way to confirm whether the target was dead. Li Anping walked towards the body on the ground step by step, and suddenly the body exploded with a bang, and then he saw countless palm-sized blood-colored bats flying around and covering the entire underground palace. The blood demon's voice came from the bats, and it was this bat that made the sound, and then it was that bat that made the sound. Li Anping. How dare you attack me? Ha 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 ha, you have the ability of the mutant system, right? With such a powerful body, I originally wanted Daxia to hand you over and let me drink a mouthful of your blood. I didn't expect you to deliver yourself. The blood demon's voice was erratic, coming from the bats one by one, and Li Anping's face did not change. When the blood demon said the last sentence, he suddenly moved his body and flew in front of the bat that made the sound. A punch was thrown, and the hurricane was raging. The bat had been pierced by Li Anping's punch. Ha, it's useless. The bat was smashed to pieces by Li Anping's punch, but the blood demon's voice continued to sound. Today, you just wait for me to suck your blood dry and die. Thousands of blood-colored bats rushed towards Li Anping from all directions, wrapping him up like a blood-colored cocoon. Facing the blood-colored bats that were sweeping in, Li Anping waved his hands, bringing up a series of after-images, as if hundreds and thousands of punches were hitting the surroundings at the same time, and dozens of blood-colored bats in the air fell down. Because Li Anping's speed was so fast, it looked like the bats were falling in large groups at the same time. From a distance, it was as if there was an invisible line around Li Anping, and all blood bats that crossed the line would be killed by a punch. But no matter how many blood bats Li Anping killed, more blood bats would be born from the blood pool and surround him. Seeing this, Li Anping snorted coldly, his body made a series of crackling noises, the surrounding strong wind exploded, the power surged, and his fists blasted in all directions again. But this time the power speed was obviously raised to a higher level, and each punch was a fist wind, blasting out a series of white air shock waves. Those blood-colored bats that rushed over were directly killed before they got close. In just a few seconds, all the blood-colored bats around Li Anping were swept away. Then Li Anping took a step and came to the position of the blood pool. With a loud shout, he punched the border of the blood pool. With a boom. With one punch, it seemed that even the space was frozen by the huge force. All the blood bats around the blood pool were directly turned into powder by Li Anping's punch. But the next moment, more blood-colored bats rushed out of the blood pool and filled the entire underground palace again. Every bat laughed harshly, as if laughing at Li Anping's powerlessness. Seeing this scene, Li Anping frowned. He thought to himself, will killing these blood bats not really hurt him? Is this kind of bat a manifestation of his power, or a part of his body? No, he is using blood bats to consume my power. While thinking, watching the blood bats rushing towards him again, Li Anping did not waste his energy to kill them all as before, but instead sprinted to avoid the blood bats. Wherever he passed, countless blood bats were hit and crushed by the huge force and turned into fragments. In a blink of an eye, Li Enping had circled the underground palace, and more blood bats were chasing him behind him. Although he could not catch up with him at his speed, as the number of blood bats increased, the space in the palace became smaller and smaller, and sooner or later these blood bats would fill the entire palace. After running around the palace, Li Enping also clearly observed the environment of the entire palace. There are only blood bats in the entire palace, nothing similar to the body was found, so this blood bat is really his body, or did his real body hide in a blood bat from the beginning? Li Enping thought about it and denied it. If the blood demon's real body was hidden in the blood bat from the beginning, then those blood bats at the beginning had been killed by him, and it was unlikely that he could hide in such an empty palace. Suddenly, Li Enping turned his head to the blood pool. He thought of the scene in which the headless body of the blood demon turned into countless blood bats at the beginning. So that's it, from the beginning, the body was a clone composed of blood bats. With a loud bang, Li Enping had already rushed into the blood pool, and saw a figure hiding at the bottom of the blood pool in a sea of red blood. Found you! Li Enping raised his right fist and smashed it down fiercely. Boom! The entire blood pool was blasted open by an invisible force, and all the blood in the blood pool was separated to the left and right under Li Enping's fist. The overflowing pool surface scattered to the ground. With one punch, the figure of the blood demon at the bottom of the blood pool was revealed. The blood demon stared at Li Enping with a dull face, his mind still not reacting. Li Enping flashed and appeared in front of him. Die! In the blur, the blood demon could only see the other party's mouth moving, as if he said this. The next moment, it was a swift and violent attack like a storm. Boom 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 boom. In the midst of blood, the blood demon flew up from the bottom of the blood pool. Without any reaction, the blood demon was punched from the bottom of the blood pool to the air above the blood pool by Li Enping, one punch after another. Each punch was as powerful as thunder. The blood demon's chest and stomach were all sunken, wounded, and all the ribs were broken. Only at this moment did he subconsciously raise his hands to block his chest. Then came Li Enping's more than 20 consecutive punches. The huge force hit the blood demon's hands in front of his chest one after another like a big hammer. The strength he hastily gathered was not enough to resist Li Enping's fierce attack. Boom! The blood demon's hands were deformed and were punched into his chest by Li Enping, as if embedded in it. Then Li Enping disappeared from the blood demon's eyes. The next moment, amazing thoughts gathered behind the blood demon. Until this moment, the blood demon really reacted from the series of blows. He had no time to think about why Li Enping found his trace so quickly, why he saw through his true form so quickly, why he was only at the third energy level, but he had such a powerful speed, or whether the white dwarf and Pluto he had called could make it. At this moment, his body was already shrouded in the shadow of death. Li Enping, this guy at the third energy level, under the series of attacks, wanted to kill him in one go. Who do you think you are? Thinking of this, the blood demon subconsciously wanted to burst out his mind and ability, but before he could make any move, a deep pain in his back had already entered his mind, which was much more painful than all the attacks just now. Ah! A scream. Li Enping's fist had already gone straight through his stomach, and then he pulled his hand back, leaving a bloody arc in the air. In his hands were large chunks of internal organs, and Li Enping squeezed them hard, and these internal organs had become a pool of rotten meat that he threw on the ground. The blood demon was attacked without any resistance, and couldn't even touch the corner of the opponent's clothes. When had he ever encountered such a thing? At this moment, his eyes were red and he suddenly screamed. I saw a blood flame rising into the sky, covering the entire body of the blood demon. This blood flame uses blood as fuel. Once it spreads to the enemy's body, it will burn continuously with the opponent's blood as nutrients until the opponent's blood is drained. It is a very vicious ability. But facing this terrifying and abnormal flame, Li Enping just sprinted suddenly, came to the front of the blood demon again, and punched the blood demon in the center of his eyebrows. With a bang, the blood demon's entire head was blown up, but at the same time, a large piece of blood flame also spread to Li Anping's arm. Li Anping didn't frown at all, and put one hand on the blood demon's shoulder. Boom! Blood was everywhere, and the blood demon's body was directly pressed to the ground by 5 steel-like fingers like a lead ball. The violent impact directly smashed the ground into pieces, and the blood demon, who was the first to bear the brunt of this force, had become a piece of tatters all over his body, and there was not a single piece of good meat on his body. But Li Anping didn't look good at this time. The whole right arm he was holding was completely wrapped in blood flames, and the sizzling sound of burning meat kept coming out, but Li Anping's expression did not change at all. He just took out the high-frequency dagger with his left hand and gently cut off the whole right arm from the shoulder. The broken arm fell to the ground, and the blood flame on it lost the blood to provide nutrients. It went out after a few seconds, leaving only the arm that had turned into a piece of charcoal. On the other side, a large piece of blood rushed out from the blood pool and came to the blood demon's side to be absorbed by him. The injuries on his body also recovered quickly with the support of blood. So Li Anping stretched out his only left arm, grabbed the high-frequency dagger, and rushed to the blood demon on the ground again. "I'll take your life while you're sick and beat you to death in one breath." Man at the Top of the Food Chain. Author, Xianglango. Chapter 167. The air was filled with the pungent smell of blood, and the red bats rushed towards Li Anping. But in front of Li Anping's peerless speed, these blood bats were too slow. In the world of extreme speed, Li Anping walked step by step towards the blood demon who was lying on the ground. With his superhuman speed, no matter how overwhelming the blood bats in front of him were, he could rush through those tiny gaps. There were only a few places that were completely blocked by blood bats, and Li Anping had to rush through them, but with his amazing strength, the result of his collision with the blood-colored bats was that the bats were smashed into pieces. When Li Anping came in front of the blood demon, the opponent's body was still wrapped in red blood flames. The high-frequency dagger in Li Anping's left hand directly crossed the blood demon's body with an airflow that tore everything apart. Even the blood flames on his body were forced to open a clear trajectory. The first knife directly cut off the blood demon's 2 broken arms. Then the second knife cut open the blood demon's chest, revealing the wriggling lungs and heart. The high-frequency dagger stabbed directly into the blood demon's heart, and a series of red knife lights lit up in the blood demon's heart, like a small light bulb. Li Anping just crushed the opponent's heart into powder. At this time, the blood bats around finally flew over and rushed towards Li Anping from all directions. Li Anping snorted coldly, and the high-frequency dagger was directly inserted into the blood demon's lungs. Then Li Anping grabbed the blood demon's shoulder with his empty left hand, and then kicked the blood demon away before being surrounded by blood bats. The next second, before tens of thousands of blood bats submerged Li Anping, he had turned into a black line and caught up with the kicked blood demon. As the figures intertwined, dozens of blood flowers burst out on the blood demon's body again, and he was attacked countless times by Li Anping in an instant. Li Anping's speed was like breaking the blood demon's cognition of the speed of the ability users. He had never seen anyone so fast, and even Song Bang was completely inferior to Li Anping at this time. From beginning to end, the blood demon did not succeed in even one active attack except relying on the protective blood flame to hurt Li Anping. Because the opponent's speed was completely beyond his perception, he could only passively take the beating. At this time, the loud noise from the battle between the two sides had also attracted the attention of the people above. The soldiers stationed in the manor rushed to the square in front of the main building in full armor to gather, and a gate leading to the underground was opened on the square. This passage leading directly to the underground palace is usually completely blocked. If it weren't for the huge noise underground, and the moment the blood demon saw Li Anping, he sent a distress signal through the instrument. They would never dare to open this passage. In the less than 1 or 2 minutes they had gathered, in addition to his hands, The blood demon's feet were also torn off by Li Anping, but the blood demon, whose hands, feet, head, and heart were all shattered, was still alive at this moment. The blood in the entire hall and the blood in the air were supporting his life. Li Anping was not doing well either. In order to fight against the opponent's protective blood flame, he had been attacking with his remaining left hand, but even so, his left hand was now burned black by the blood flame, which was slowly approaching his body. This kind of blood flame is very special. As long as there is blood, it can burn without air, and even water will not work. Li Anping had no choice but to stop attacking and take the time to heal his wounds. When he stopped, more and more blood bats in the underground palace squeaked excitedly, all with red eyes rushing towards him. Facing the swarming bats, Li Anping smiled lightly, jumped up lightly, then raised his right leg, and kicked from top to bottom, like a thunderbolt. With a swish. As the whip kick fell, the ground seemed to be cut open by an invisible chi force, revealing a crack several tens of meters long. Amid the flying stone chips, Li Anping's kick directly cut out a white chi force that flew towards the bats. Wherever he passed, large pieces of blood-colored bats turned into red powder and floated in the air. Finally, the white chi force hit the wall, leaving a dent several centimeters deep. With just this one whip kick, 1/3 of the bats in the air had been killed, revealing a large hole. Then Li Anping was in the air, twisting his waist again, and after a few kicks, only a few sporadic bats were left in the air, not knowing whether to move forward or backward. At this time, Li Anping's right hand had grown again under the infusion of soul energy. He grabbed his left shoulder with his right hand and tore off his burning left arm, and casually threw the burnt left arm on the ground. On the blood demon's side, his body was once again covered with blood, and the wounds all over his body were slowly wriggling. It seemed that as long as he was given time, he would be able to recover his body again. And blood bats kept coming out of the blood pool. This won't work, Li Anping frowned, he has too much blood here, and the fight will never end. Thinking of this, Li Anping was in mid-air, and before he landed, he stepped directly into the air, bursting the air, and rushed towards the blood demon again. When passing by a pillar, Li Anping waved his hand knife and cut a pillar in the hall. There are many such pillars in the entire underground palace, which are used to support the structure of this underground space. He picked up the cylinder with one hand, came to the blood demon, and swung it at the other's broken body. Just like playing baseball, the cylinder directly hit the blood demon out, broke more than a dozen cylinders, and fell to the ground. This was to prevent the blood flame from burning him again. Then Li Anping hugged the cylinder and rushed to the blood demon again. At this moment, a crackling sound was heard, and a door opened, and many footsteps came. "Huh," Li Anping sneered, "just in time." After saying that, he hugged the cylinder and swung it hard, and a gust of wind blew towards the direction of the gate, directly blowing the soldiers who rushed in first to the ground. At the same time, the blood demon's body was also hit in the direction of the gate in this swing. There was a bang, and a series of screams rang out. The blood demon's body was like a cannonball, smashing dozens of soldiers into meat paste. Then the whole body fell into the wall. The next moment, Li Anping, holding the cylinder, also rushed into the crowd. The swinging cylinder was like a storm of blood and flesh. Wherever it passed, no matter who it was smashed into a meat paste. The blood demon's body was like a baseball. Li Anping was like chasing this man and hitting him to the ground. The soldiers screamed and looked at Li Anping, who was rushing towards them in despair. Their bullets could not hit the other party, and even if they did, they would be healed instantly. The soldiers in the square could not see the situation below, but could only hear a series of loud crashes, mixed with intermittent screams. They looked at each other, at a loss. The next moment, a tattered body covered in blood and almost a pool of rotten meat flew out of the underground passage. Li Anping followed closely behind, and the cylinder in his hand had been broken into 4 or 5 sections and thrown to the ground by him, and his left hand had grown out again, looking as if he had never been injured. Looking at the soldiers in front of him, he rushed over with a wild laugh, and with a light wave of his hands, a bloody storm had already been set off. He casually grabbed a soldier and threw him several hundred meters away, killing him directly. With a casual punch, several soldiers were smashed to pieces by the white energy. With a sprint, he knocked away more than a dozen soldiers, who screamed and flew out, and died in mid-air with their bones shattered. Smelling the blood rain in the air that he had created, Li Anping showed a cruel smile. At this time, the remaining soldiers had completely collapsed, wailing and fleeing in all directions. Li Anping was too lazy to pay attention to them, and walked directly to the blood demon who was still slowly crawling. He grabbed a soldier's body and used it as a golf club, swinging it at the blood demon's body. The opponent still had blood flames on his body, and he wanted to use this method to hit the opponent farther, away from the blood under his feet. Man at the top of the food chain. Author, Xianglang Guo. Chapter 168. When the blood demon flew in the air, Li Anping threw away the body and stomped his feet hard. There was a loud bang, as if a landmine exploded under his feet. The whole world had become slow again. Li Anping flew to the side of the blood demon in the air and swung his palm from bottom to top. In an instant, the air was gathered. The two were dozens of meters apart. A white air force had hit the blood demon. His body was blown up directly. Then there was another loud explosion. The airflow scattered and shot. The blood demon was hit by a white air force again and flew into the sky. The soldiers on the ground could only see white light flashing in the air and thunder-like explosions, and then two black shadows flew quickly into the sky one after another. Li Anping hit the blood demon's body one palm after another through the air, and the opponent's body broke again and again, becoming smaller, and many pieces of meat fell from the air. Until the end, the soldiers on the ground could no longer see the two figures, only the sound of explosions still spread from the sky to all directions. In less than a minute, Li Anping had already hit the blood demon from bottom to top for more than 1,000 meters, and swung hundreds of empty palms. At this time, the blood demon was only left with the last fist-sized piece of meat slowly wriggling in the air. Without the blood-filled environment to replenish his energy, and being attacked by Li Anping for so long, he was already at the moment of exhaustion. Murderous aura permeated in the air. Li Anping stared at the piece of meat in the air, and his mind energy condensed frantically towards his right fist. With the next punch, he would completely kill the blood demon. Then, an invisible scream came from the piece of meat. Ah! The sharp sound wave broke through the air and suddenly tore the entire sky. Then countless rustling sounds rang out on the ground. Hualala hualala. It seemed like the sound of the Yangtze River flowing. What is this? Li Anping frowned. The sound of blood flowing? As if summoned by the emperor, all animals on the ground within a radius of 1 kilometer died instantly, and then their bodies exploded, and the blood in their bodies turned into blood snakes and shot into the air. Soldiers, ordinary staff, even cats and dogs, birds, and mice, all exploded and died instantly. Thousands of blood lines rose into the sky, and the center of convergence was the position of the blood demon and Li Anping. It looked like countless red meteors. The most eye-catching one was a blood dragon that drilled out from the ground. That was the blood from the underground blood pool, forming a huge blood dragon with a diameter of 1 meter and a length of more than 10 meters, flying towards the blood demon. This was the last struggle of the blood demon before his death. After this move, the blood demon may not be able to use his abilities for several months, but at this critical moment, he no longer had time to think so much. Thousands of bloodlines shot up into the sky, constantly converging in midair, and finally turned into an endless sea of blood and rolled towards the blood demon in midair. The remaining pieces of flesh of the blood demon made a joyous sound and kept vibrating. Once the blood sea wrapped the blood demon, his injuries could be restored again, and he could even turn the entire blood sea into blood flames and make a shocking blow. When the blood sea was about to attack, a white, powerful right hand with skin as delicate as a baby grabbed the constantly vibrating piece of flesh. Looking at the blood sea sweeping over, Li Anping grabbed a fist-sized piece of flesh and stuffed it directly into his mouth. After a few crunching sounds, Li Anping swallowed the piece of flesh in one gulp. The blood demon was eaten by him just like that. Along the way, Li Anping's personality became more and more extreme, and his heart became darker and darker. Until today, facing the pressure brought by the Flame Dragon Vanguard and the Star Alliance, he finally took this step and crossed this taboo, or should I say, the seal? When the blood demon was swallowed by Li Anping, the blood sea that had gathered in the air just now lost control and returned to its previous state. It no longer had extraordinary power, let alone the power to fly, and fell directly from the air. It was as if a bloody rain fell from the sky. The blood of all creatures within a kilometer radius, plus the blood in the blood pool that had gathered for who knows how many years in the blood demon's underground palace, all fell from the sky at this moment. How spectacular was that scene! The whole earth was dyed red. Li Anping, who swallowed the blood demon in one mouthful, felt endless power spreading out of his body. The mind energy rose up and burned on Li Anping's body like a flame, and as the power in Li Anping's body became stronger and stronger, the mind energy became more and more, just like a huge fireball, burning in the sky. If a capable person passed by here and looked up at the sky, he would feel that there seemed to be an extra sun in the sky. In the center of the mind energy sun, Li Anping's body kept shaking, and the surging power poured into his body. Devouring the soul of a level 5 ability user was already a great tonic, not to mention that Li Anping ate it with skin and flesh. Li Anping's forehead was bulging with veins, and he felt as if something in his body had been penetrated. The barrier between the third energy level and the fourth energy level was instantly broken, and the range of his soul absorption instantly reached an astonishing 600 meters. On his body, muscles like steel bars bulged up one by one, and then the strong wind shook, and a storm blew out from Li Anping's body to the surroundings. Just the shaking of the body muscles pushed away the air and formed a hurricane. At this moment, Li Anping's body was improving again beyond the limit of human imagination. With the improvement of the body, the mind energy came out of his limbs and bones crazily, forming a thing like a sun fireball with a diameter of hundreds of meters in the air. A few minutes later, after a crazy shaking, the body stopped growing. At this time, Li Anping's physical fitness had become strength 19.8, speed 19.0, and physical fitness 20.5. The mind energy on his body was like a bright sun, shining on the earth. And his ability level also reached the fourth energy level. Li Anping clenched his fist and suddenly punched at the foot, that is, the manor on the ground. With a boom, a huge white gas energy blasted towards the manor on the ground with Li Anping's fist. The huge white gas energy was half an acre in size and smashed straight towards the ground. Before the chi arrived, the strong wind was already overflowing. The huge force pushed the air to create a storm. Large tracts of trees were blown crooked and the glass was directly shattered. The next moment, the white chi had hit the ground. A series of bangs and bangs sounded, and the houses on the ground collapsed at the first time. Facing Li Anping's punch in the air, they were like toys made of paper, shattered in an instant, and became a ruin. It felt like a child slapped down the sand castle he built on the beach. As the chi further contacted the ground began to sink and sag. Large pieces of land could not withstand this force and sank directly into the ground. The underground palace of the blood demon was also completely buried under this blow. And this was just a casual blow from Li Anping. With the improvement of physical fitness, now, the physical fitness has only been improved by a few points, and the effect has reached a terrifying level. At this moment, Li Anping suddenly turned his head and looked at the sky in the distance. With his extraordinary eyesight, the scene several kilometers away was brought closer in his sight. A fiery red figure was flying over at an astonishing speed. Wherever it passed, the sky seemed to be stained with a layer of red, and large patches of clouds were dispersed by the astonishing heat, leaving a long line of fire. "Zhurong," Li Anping said lightly, "the support speed is quite fast. Zhurong can fly by spraying flames, and his speed is the fastest, so he came first. It seems that Pluto and White Dwarf may also arrive at any time." Thinking of this, when Li Anping was about to take action, a little black gas suddenly emerged from the back of his head. This black gas was like a bit of ink. After falling into the mind energy outside his body, it instantly dyed large areas of mind energy into a dark black. Li Anping felt a sharp pain in his brain, as if countless silver needles with lightning pierced his brain at the same time, and then kept stirring back and forth. He couldn't help but hold his brain with both hands. He had long been accustomed to the super-fast regeneration ability. Even if he was cut into pieces, Li Anping would not frown. At this moment, he couldn't help but cry out in pain from the severe pain in his brain. At the same time, the mind energy on his body had completely turned black. It was as if a black sun floated in the sky. It gave people a sense of horror and evil. It seemed that something extremely terrible had descended. On the other side, Zhurong in the distance had also flown a few hundred meters away. Li Anping forced himself to endure the waves of severe pain in his mind and wanted to take down Zhurong first. At this time, a familiar voice came from his mind. "Li Anping, thank you for your efforts. I will accept this body. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment." Man at the top of the food chain. Author, Xianglang. Chapter 169. As this voice sounded in Li Anping's heart, he felt that a dark figure appeared in his mind. "Hey! Is it you?" Li Anping said in shock and anger. He felt that his body was beginning to lose control. "It's me, Li Anping. You've had enough fun during this period. It's your turn to give your body to me." He laughed strangely, and then Li Anping felt a consciousness circling in his mind, as if to expel and destroy his consciousness. "Give up, in the war of consciousness, you have no chance of winning at all." Li Anping held his brain with both hands, and waves of pain came from there, making him want to tear his head apart. In the world of consciousness, the part representing Li Anping was constantly invaded by a large mass of black matter, and the part of the whole body belonging to Li Anping was gradually decreasing. Hei's figure appeared in Li Anping's mind again. He was all black, with black flames under his feet and double horns on his head. He looked arrogant and invincible, just like the legendary demon, bringing death and fear. "Li Anping, if it weren't for me, you would have been dead. Now that I've let you live happily for so long, you should be satisfied." In his mind, Li Anping's figure also appeared, exactly the same as his appearance in reality. He angrily said, "Hey, you did save my life. If you have any request, I will not refuse. But you want to kill me and replace me. Even ants are greedy for life. How can I not resist? It's useless for you to resist." On Hei's body, the dark flames surged, and he rushed towards Li Anping. In Li Anping's brain, two different consciousnesses immediately fought into a ball. However, Hei's consciousness obviously had the upper hand. Every punch and kick of his could smash Li Anping to pieces. Although in the world of consciousness, Li Anping could be resurrected every time he was killed, but after each resurrection, he felt that he became a little weaker than before, and the darkness in his mind occupied a larger area. When Li Anping and Hei were fighting in the world of consciousness, Zhurong also rushed over. In his eyes, Li Anping was holding his head with both hands, motionless, with black thoughts surging all over his body, and slowly falling from midair. "Li Anping, you are so brave that you dare to come here alone," Zhurong shouted, and 2 fireballs the size of a room gathered on his hands, rushing towards Li Enping. "You will die here today as my first military achievement after joining the Yanlong vanguard." The flames of more than 6,000 degrees condensed in Zhu Rong's hands, the water was evaporated, and the air around him became distorted. Before he got close, Li Enping's hair had begun to turn dry and yellow. This level of flames can melt even a steel plate in an instant. Zhu Rong absolutely did not believe that Li Enping could resist his flames with his flesh. He had heard before that Li Enping's abilities were great strength, fast speed, and regeneration. However, he was confident that with his own flames, even if he could not catch up with Li Enping, he could protect himself. What's even more interesting is that Li Enping didn't know why he didn't move at all, allowing him to attack. Seeing that the flames had already invaded within 100 meters of Li Enping, Zhu Rong showed a smile. Die. Under Zhu Rong's control, 2 huge fireballs flew towards Li Enping, who was falling in the air at the same time, just like light swallowing darkness. The flames with a temperature of more than 6,000 degrees evaporated most of the black thoughts coming out of Li Enping before they got close. In Zhu Rong's sneer, when Li Enping was about to be engulfed by the flames, Li Enping, who was holding his head, suddenly looked at Zhu Rong. At this time, Li Enping's left eye had completely turned black, while his right eye remained the same. It gave people an indescribable feeling of weirdness. The glance he gave Zhu Rong made him feel cold. It was as if he was being stared at by something. It was like a poisonous snake staring at a frog, a tiger staring at a sheep, and a chill came out of Zhu Rong's heart. Then 2 completely different roars came out of Li Enping's mouth, but they all said the same word. "Get out! Get out!" Then, with Zhu Rong's eyesight, he could only see that Li Enping's arm seemed to flash, and then an explosive force exploded in front of him, and all the flames were extinguished in an instant. Even Zhu Rong's body, the blazing flames that were originally ejected from his body, only a few sparks were left. Vacuum circle. Li Enping used his absolute strength to create a pseudo-vacuum state with just 1 punch. After the duel with the Thunder Emperor, he specially created a trick to deal with the ability users of lightning and fire. It was already terribly powerful when used by Li Enping at this moment. The air around Zhu Rong within 10 meters was pushed away by Li Enping's punch. In this case, he could not even eject the flames. Then, in Zhu Rong's terrified eyes, Li Enping blew at him impatiently again. A white light flashed, and the white air exhaled by Li Enping had hit Zhu Rong. With a bang, the overwhelming force carried him far away. In mid-air, Zhu Rong felt that his internal organs were severely injured by this blow, and his body was pushed by this huge force and flew several kilometers away in a blink of an eye. But leaving also got rid of the vacuum circle, and his body could spray flames again. The temperature in the air kept rising, and Zhu Rong stretched his legs straight, constantly spraying flames in the opposite direction of himself. The sprayed flames gave a huge driving force to make him stop by himself. But Li Enping's power was too great. With just a breath, Zhu Rong couldn't stop spitting fire. In a blink of an eye, he flew a few kilometers. Zhu Rong roared, and violent flames suddenly spurted out. The whole sky seemed to be on fire. And this time it finally worked. Although Zhu Rong continued to fly towards the distance, his speed gradually slowed down. So Zhu Rong kept spraying flames to resist the force of Li Enping hitting him, so as to reduce his flying speed. After more than 10 seconds, he finally offset this driving force and stopped in mid-air. But when he looked at Li Enping's previous position again, Zhu Rong's eyes showed only deep fear. At this time, he had flown more than 10 kilometers away from Li Enping's position. Just a breath of air knocked him more than 10 kilometers away. He didn't dare to imagine how likely he would survive if Li Enping really wanted to kill him just now. At this time, his internal organs were still aching, and a smell of blood came out of his mouth. So Zhu Rong stopped in mid-air, hesitating for a moment whether to go to fight Li Enping again. The strength shown by the opponent is no longer as simple as a level 5 ability user. On the other side, Li Anping in mid-air now has no time to care about what Zhu Rong thinks. After he drove Zhu Rong away like slapping a fly, his whole brain fell into endless pain again. No longer caring about what will happen outside, he no longer uses the stepping void, and directly lets his body fall to the ground, putting all his thoughts in his brain. At this moment in his mind, Li Anping's consciousness and Hei's consciousness are still fighting. I saw Hei grabbed Li Anping's head and twisted it hard, and his head had been twisted off. Then he pulled hard with both hands, and Li Anping's body was already split into two. But a few seconds later, Li Anping was resurrected again in the sea of consciousness and rushed towards Hei, who was laughing. Hei laughed wildly and said, "It's useless, it's useless. After my ability reaches the 4th energy level, all the energy, or your mind energy, will gather together to become an incarnation. This incarnation condenses the power of spirit and body, and is even stronger than the original body. And now, at the moment you reach the 4th energy level, I will seize your incarnation with my consciousness. At this moment, I am definitely stronger than you. And you have no experience in fighting in the sea of consciousness, let alone my opponent." As he spoke, he had brutally killed Li Anping 5 times again, and the darkness in the sea of consciousness had occupied 60% of the space. Li Anping also became anxious, so the black figure composed of mind energy is the product of the ability reaching the 4th energy level? But now it is occupied by Hei, and if it goes on like this, it will really lose. I have to think of a way. When Li Anping and Hei were fighting in the sea of consciousness, his body had already fallen from mid-air. Just when Li Anping's body was about to hit the ground, a giant hand made entirely of stone suddenly emerged from the ground and grabbed Li Anping, who was falling. With a bang, the giant hand closed and had already grasped Li Anping tightly in its palm. Next to the giant hand stood a black-haired man. He looked at Li Anping in his palm and said, "Why can't I feel the existence of Zhu Rong and the blood demon?" The stone arm trembled, and then the stone kept twisting and denting, forming a man's face. A dull voice came from the face, "I don't know, but Li Anping has been caught. I feel that he seems to be in extreme pain, but there are no burns on his body. It may be the work of the blood demon." He asked the black-haired man, "Sir, do you want to seal him?" The black-haired man thought for a while, looked at Li Anping, who was held by the giant hand and looked painful, and said, "Well, I heard that he is very fast, so let's seal him first to avoid unnecessary trouble." After speaking, he stretched out a hand to grab Li Anping's head, and saw that his palm was like a black hole, directly sucking Li Anping in. Man at the top of the food chain. Author, Xianglang Guo. Chapter 170. The black-haired man is Hades. The ability he used to absorb Li Anping is called Hades by himself. All those who have seen this ability, except Blood Demon and White Dwarf, have been sucked into Hades. Even Zhu Rong, who has joined the Flame Dragon Vanguard, does not know about Hades' ability. The Hades is a very special ability. The condition for activation is very simple, that is, being touched by Hades. After activation, the target will pass through Hades' body and enter a world he calls Hades. This small world is about 1,000 square kilometers in size, and the creatures sucked into this space will be randomly teleported to one of the places. As long as you are still in this Hades, you can be resurrected after death. That is to say, after being killed here, you will be resurrected randomly in a certain place in the Hades. And those resurrection points and entry points are overlapped and have fixed positions. But with each death, the fusion between creatures and the underworld will deepen. After an ordinary person dies 3 times in the underworld, he will completely integrate into the space of the underworld. At that time, this person can only live in the underworld forever and can never return to the real world. At the same time, he will also be affected by the Hades and completely obey his orders, becoming a puppet without emotions and thoughts. However, the fusion speed with the underworld is related to the spiritual will of the person. An ordinary person will merge after 3 deaths, while a soldier will merge about 6 times, and a battle-hardened warrior will generally merge 10 times. The spirit of the ability user is often stronger. For example, a level 4 ability user may have to die 50 times before fusion. And a level 5 ability user must be killed more than 100 times to complete the fusion. As for the way to leave the underworld, there is naturally only one way, to defeat the Hades. The sky is completely dark clouds, there are no stars and no sun, only a blood moon hanging in the air, and the whole underworld world is covered with a layer of red. This is the eternal scene of this world. The whole underworld world has only night, no day. The place in front of him was a stone forest in the underworld. The whole stone forest was dead silent. Not to mention the birds singing, there was not even a sound of insects. It was as if everything had fallen into a deep sleep. At this moment, a man suddenly appeared in the sky more than 10 meters away. After the man appeared, he had no reaction. He fell to the ground with a bang and did not move. But this time, it was like a stone falling into the water, stirring up countless ripples. There were rustling voices in the stone forest. Here they come. It's a newcomer. It seems to have fainted. Where are the zombies? Have they come? I saw a dozen people in tattered clothes rushing to Li Anping, who fell to the ground, and lifted him up with all their hands and feet, and ran towards the distance. In the crowd, a thin man with vertical pupils suddenly pointed to the back of the crowd and shouted, "They are coming." The blond man in the lead said nervously, "Hawkeye, how many zombies are coming?" "Boss, there are a lot of them," the vertical pupil man called. Hawkeye stared at the depths of the stone forest, where a large group of pale-faced people were running towards them. "There are hundreds of them, just seeing them, and there are more behind, estimated to be at least 1,000. "So many," the blond man in the lead shouted again. "How about the newcomers?" A bald strong man who was carrying Li Anping shouted, "It's a level 4 ability user, but he fainted, and ordinary means seemed to be unable to wake him up." The blond man nodded to show that he understood, pointed to the 2 people in the team and shouted, "Abeo and Ahu, you 2 brothers have never died, this time you will be responsible for the rear, and the others will follow me." The 2 men stayed where they were, and the rest of the people took Li Anping away quickly. But after walking a few steps, Hawkeye screamed and said anxiously, "Not only behind, there are also people in front." "What?" the blond man said nervously. "How many are coming?" "In front, on the left, on the right." Hawkeye trembled more and more as he spoke, and finally said intermittently, 5,000, 10,000, no, at least tens of thousands are rushing towards us from all directions. "How is it possible?" the blond man said in disbelief. "The newcomer this time is only a level 4 ability user, why did he attract so many zombies?" "I don't know." Hawkeye's tone became more and more urgent. "What should I do? They are getting closer and closer, should I give up this newcomer?" The blond man frowned fiercely, and seeing that all the team members were staring at him, he also hesitated. They were all people who had not been integrated after being captured by Hades and put into the underworld. There are many people like them in the whole underworld, and they have now all united to form a resistance organization. However, because their number and combat power are too different from those controlled by Hades, they have not been able to confront Hades head-on, and can only rely on escaping everywhere, rescuing, and uniting newcomers to accumulate strength. At this moment, for a new level 4 ability user, is it worth it to risk the death of all their team members? The blond man hesitated for a moment, then said decisively, "All those zombies are commanded by Hades, and they always act according to the person they are dealing with. This time, they mobilized so much power for this newcomer, there must be a reason." He turned to a woman and said, "Pink, use mental communication to inform the leader of our situation and request support." Then he said to a middle-aged man, "Old Pike, you have died too many times. Stay with the newcomers and don't come out. Everyone line up and wait for the leader's support. As the blond man finished speaking, more than a dozen people on the scene scattered around Li Anping and Old Pike. Since the captain had decided to fight, they had no complaints. After all, except for Old Pike, the others were selected because they were good at fighting, could cooperate with each other, and had died less frequently. A few minutes later, rumbling footsteps came from all directions, and the stone forest was full of pale-faced people. Cold sweat kept dripping down the blond man's cheeks and splashing on the ground. He asked worriedly, "Pink, have you notified the leader?" The woman named Pink said, "Yes, the leader said he will come soon." At this time, the crowd that was swarming in slowly slowed down their pace hundreds of meters away from Li Anping and his men. These people were ragged, pale, and stiff, looking like zombies. They were the people who were merged in the underworld. They have completely lost their emotions and memories, and have completely lost their consciousness. Every move is subject to the orders of the Hades. And because they have completely merged with the underworld, they will be resurrected after death, and they are immortal. Because of these characteristics, the rebels call these merged people zombies. As the zombies got closer and closer, the atmosphere in the air became more and more solemn. No one spoke. They all stared at tens of thousands of zombies, some swallowed their saliva, and some sweated in their palms. Even if they were stared at by tens of thousands of living people, they would sweat, not to mention that there were tens of thousands of zombies with murderous intent. The blond man in the lead pursed his lips, and a heavy mind energy slowly lit up on his body. With his action, more or less mind energy emerged from the bodies of more than 10 people in the entire team. The team members led by the blond man were all capable people. As the mind energy of each of them rose, the zombies around them all raised their heads and opened their mouths to howl. Tens of thousands of people raised their heads and howled at the same time, and they were all the kind of ghosts crying and gods howling. The pressure brought by the scene was simply infinite, not to mention that with the zombies howling, a little bit of mind energy also emerged in their team. Most of these zombies are ordinary people. On average, there will be one capable person in every 5,000 people. While facing this army of zombies, the rebels have to fight against 10 immortal capable people. The blond man looked at the zombies howling and shouted, "I'm so annoyed." Then he punched the zombies hard. With this punch, a purple light shot out, and hundreds of zombies were crushed and blown away wherever they passed. This is the blond man's ability, which is to materialize power and turn invisible power into a real attack. As this punch was thrown, tens of thousands of zombies also roared and rushed towards Li Anping and his position, and the rebels also used their abilities to attack. A great battle began under this blood moon.